Hey everybody, my name is Dmitry, and in this tutorial I will show you how to change the font size of different elements on a WordPress website. Changing the colors in a WordPress theme is a little easier than what we will be doing today. The process is basically the same, but with one extra step. We will have to make sure that our changes look great on any screen size, on large monitors, laptops, and smartphones. So make sure to watch this video to the end so that you don't miss anything important. Also at the end, I will talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of customizing a WordPress website the way I am showing you today. For this tutorial, I will be using just the Google Chrome browser. Let's open it and get to work. For this tutorial, I will be using the News Today theme, which is available on WordPress.org. This is a free magazine-style theme. Using this theme, you can display 4 featured posts on the homepage. Let's change the font size of the post titles in this section of the theme. Let's begin with the titles of the 3 featured posts that are displayed below the main featured post. I will hover the title of one of the posts, right-click on my mouse and choose Inspect. The Chrome browser will highlight the anchor tag in this title, which usually contains only the CSS properties for color and text decoration. Some developers add size properties to the anchor tag, but this is not the case. We have to select the parent HTML tag of the anchor tag, the one that is one level above it. In this case, it is the H2 tag with the entry title class. If we look in the panel to the right, we will see the CSS properties that are applied to this selector. Let's check first if this theme uses different font sizes of the post titles at different screen sizes. But before we do that, I have to explain the extra step that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Most WordPress themes are responsive, which means that they adapt to the screen size, be it a high-resolution monitor or the small screen of a smartphone. Because of that, developers will usually code different font sizes for different screen sizes. But when we implement custom font sizes, we usually do it on a desktop PC and forget to check what happens on a smartphone. Checking that is simple. Begin by selecting the HTML tag that you want to inspect. In our case, it is the H2 HTML tag with the entry title class. Move the mouse cursor to the edge of the browser's window. You can do this only in windowed mode. Now start dragging the edge of the browser and keep your eyes on the CSS selector and its properties. Let's see if anything changes when we reduce the window's width to some common sizes, like 640 pixels. The current viewport size is displayed in the top right corner while we are resizing the window. This piece of information will help us later. Nothing happens at 900, 800, 700 pixels. But once we reach 640 pixels, look at what happens. The theme adds a new CSS declaration that is displayed on all screens that have a width smaller than and including 640 pixels. Because the posts are no longer displayed in a columned layout, the font size is increased to 1 root M. Now that we've identified the relevant CSS code, let's open our Customize page in a new browser tab, and then open the additional CSS section. First, let's copy the default CSS code from the theme and paste it in our additional CSS text area. Let's increase the font size to 1 root M. In this case, it would be the same as changing the font size from 14 to 16 pixels. I will save my new code by clicking the Publish button at the top. After changing that, let's make sure that this larger font size will not create any issues for our visitors on smaller screens. Don't forget to refresh your browser window for the changes to be visible. Here we can see that at 960 pixels, my post titles cover the full size of the thumbnails. If your post titles are this long or even longer, then it might become an issue. Let's continue resizing our browser window. At around 660 pixels, the titles start popping out again, but at 640 the featured posts are displayed one per row, so the issue goes away again. So let's try changing another element. This time, let's change the font size of the title of a main featured post on the homepage. Hover the post title, right-click and choose Inspect. Find the H2 tag and identify the relevant CSS selector and properties. Let's copy the code and paste it in our additional CSS text area field. Now let's increase the font size from 2√M to 3√M. Looks good, so let's publish our changes. Back in our website, let's refresh our window for the changes to take effect. Now let's do our responsive check. Start reducing the width of the browser window. Around the 960 pixels mark, this title size becomes problematic. But if we look carefully at the CSS rules for this element, we will notice that the theme tries to reduce the font size to 1.5√M for all visitors with a maximum screen width of 960 pixels. But our new custom CSS code takes precedence, so it overrides the default behavior in the theme. We will have to fix that. First, let's copy the definition for our media breakpoint. Select just the first line, copy and paste it at the end of our additional CSS text area. Now you have to manually add the opening and closing curly brackets. Now let's copy our CSS declaration. Decrease the font size from 3√M to 2.25√M and publish our changes. Back in our main browser tab, let's refresh and make sure that it works correctly. At the 960 pixels breakpoint, our new rule works well. Let's continue decreasing our width. At around 800 pixels, this new font size becomes an issue again, but at 768 it is taken care of once the theme drops the sidebar to the bottom. At 640 all looks well, but at around 580 it becomes a problem again. So if you expect to have titles that are longer than this one, then it would be smart to take care of this issue. Let's add a new responsive CSS rule and make it take effect at the common 640 breakpoint. Back on our Customize page, let's copy the full code for the 960 breakpoint and paste it below it. Change the max width value from 960 to 640 and the font size to 1.5√M. Press the Publish button to save our changes. Now that we've learned how to change the font size of unique elements on the website, let me show you one more scenario in which our workflow will be a little different. This time, let's change the post excerpt of the main featured post on the homepage. This little text that appears under the title. Let's quickly change the font size as we did before. Copy the code, paste it in our additional CSS text area, and change the font size to 1.25√M. And publish our changes. Let's take a look at the homepage. Everything seems okay, but if we scroll down a little bit, what do we see? The font size of regular post excerpts is also bigger. This happened because the excerpt in the main featured post and the excerpts of regular posts have the same CSS declaration. But how do we fix it? To better understand the fixing process, I have to bring up the concept of CSS Specificity. A great explanation comes from MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network. Specificity is the means by which browsers decide which CSS property values are the most relevant to an element and therefore will be applied. Sounds complicated, but I assure you it is not. What we have to do is tweak our CSS declaration and make it more specific or unique to our case. Let's go back to the Element Inspector tool and analyze our HTML code. If we look at our regular posts, we can see that our excerpt is just a paragraph tag with the entry excerpt class. Every post is represented by a HTML list item with some custom CSS classes. We can see the same structure for our featured posts above. If we continue going up the document tree, we can see that these featured posts are contained in a div tag with the ID Home Featured Posts. That's exactly what we need. Let's copy the ID and switch to our Customize tab. Move your cursor at the beginning of a CSS declaration, type in the hash character and paste our tag ID right after it. The hash character tells the browser that we want to style a HTML tag with that ID. After publishing our changes, we can see that the font size of the featured posts excerpt is now bigger, while regular posts look as they did before. Congratulations! You now know the basics of changing colors and font sizes on a WordPress website. You've also learned how to do a basic test of how your website looks on a smaller screen. Now let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of customizing a website using this method. The first advantage is that this process doesn't require any coding knowledge or experience. Another advantage is that you don't need any software, plugins, and so on. You can do it directly from the dashboard. And finally, a great pro is that your additional CSS will not be overwritten on a theme update, but it will go away if you switch to a different theme. One of the main disadvantages is that this process is not very convenient if you plan to do a lot of changes. The amount of code can quickly add up, which leaves room for mistakes. If you plan a significant amount of changes, consider doing it by creating and loading a separate CSS file with your code. You can do it directly in the theme or by creating a child theme, but that's a topic for another video. Another disadvantage, though a minor one, is that your custom CSS code will be loaded inline before the closing head tag. Some developers dislike inline CSS, me being one of them, but generally this is not a real issue that you should worry about. And that's all for today's tutorial. Now you should be able to make some basic changes on your WordPress website. If you found this tutorial to be helpful, please consider liking it and leaving a comment below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.